From Built It Productions, it's The Great Creators. Conversations about creativity with some of the most celebrated actors, musicians, and performers of our time. I'm 𝐥𝐤𝐤𝐬, and on the show today, Emmy, Grammy, and Tony Award winner Billy Porter on how he managed to stay committed even during his darkest moments.
You have to be practicing it always, even when no one's listening. And most of the time, no one will be listening. And that sustained me, because I found that whenever I was engaged in something artistic, whether I was making money or not, I could find a balance and I could find a hope inside of that work.
Billy Porter is one of the most celebrated stage actors on Broadway. He won a Tony for his role as Lola in Kinky Boots, and he's also played iconic characters on television, including the part of Pray Tell in the FX series Pose. But Billy's also a fashion icon. You've definitely seen photos of him wearing intricate outfits on the red carpet, including his famous tuxedo dress he wore at the Oscars. His success, though, didn't come easy. Billy did land some big roles right out of college, like in a 1994 Broadway revival of the musical Grease. But he felt like those early roles had typecast him as sort of a gay clown, something he resented. In this episode, you'll hear how Billy started to push back and stop taking those kinds of roles. And as a result, he spent a decade in obscurity, without much work at all. But Billy used that time to hone his craft. You'll also find out how Billy went back to school to learn to write for stage and screen and to find roles that played to his strengths. And Billy talks about what kept him going when it seemed like his career might never recover. And it all came down to advice he got from his Aunt Dorothy. Stay ready so you don't have to get ready. That's all coming up after this break. Hey, before we get back to the show, just a quick announcement. If you're listening in the car or on a smart speaker and you have young kids in range, just a heads up that there are a few swear words in this episode in case you want to listen later with headphones or without the kids nearby, but I definitely hope you keep listening either way. Okay, thanks so much, and on with the show. Billy Porter was born and raised in Pittsburgh. His parents split when he was still a baby, and he was raised by his mother, who was active in her church. Billy says that his early years spent in church taught him a lot about music and fashion. But even when he was a kid, he was always made to feel different, not manly enough, not straight enough. And when his stepfather started to sexually abuse him at the age of 7, Billy started to look for ways to escape his home life. And eventually, he found that escape in the theater program at his middle school.
I was being bused to a middle school that was probably about a half hour, 40 minutes from my house. And the intention was to mix the races. Yeah. The unfortunate part about that was the black schools in the black neighborhoods were underfunded even then. Many black students were behind. And when we got to this school where we were supposed to be mixed, they separated us by aptitude. So you were in a school that was supposed to be mixed, but the aptitude then separated you further.
Yeah.
So all the black students were in mainstream classes. Most of the black students were in mainstream classes. And then there was the scholars program, which were mainly white kids with a few of us peppered in. I don't know how I got in, but I was in the mainstream. I was in the scholars program. There were maybe 2 of us to a class, maybe 3 of us to a class, 3 black people to a class. And so I felt out of place, I guess. But there was there were after school programs. And when I tell you, like, after school programs, I mean like a 3-ring binder about this big. You know, y'all can't see it, but it was at least 4 to 6 inches, front and back, pages front and back, filled with after school programs. Like,
wow.
Nobody left the school on Wednesday after school. Wednesdays was the after school program day.
Yeah.
Nobody left the school. The school was filled. Every room was filled with some sort of after school creative activity. And so Rising Star Musical Theater was one of them. And I went to the meeting, the first meeting. They explained to us what a musical was. They said, come back next week and we'll have auditions. You can sing anything you want. You can sing a cappella, very American Idol, singing a cappella. and we're going to do a musical by the name of Babes in Arms. It's Rodgers and Hart. And there were hundreds of people in the room, like hundreds of people.
Yeah.
And everybody will get a part. You know, everybody will be in it. And every role will be double cast.
Yeah.
So there'll be 2 casts for everything and then the ensemble. So I came back in the next week and I sang a song and the cast list went up the following week and every role was double cast except for me. And it said Gus Fielding, Billy Porter, and then the second cast was empty. And in that moment, it was clear, oh, wait, I might be good at this.
Mm-hmm.
I've never done it before, but somebody thinks I'm good at it because there's nobody else playing this part. So I get to do all 4 performances. And that's sort of what started it. But I didn't make the connection at the time that you could make money doing it. Like, I didn't understand that it was a profession.
Yeah.
Until that summer. And I was watching the Tony Awards by accident. Because I just happened to be washing dishes in my kitchen. Everybody knows this story already because I say it everywhere I go. And the Tony Awards came on, and it was the year Dreamgirls was up for all those Tonys. And for the first time, I understood that I could, make a living doing it. There were Black people on my screen that were elevated. They were beautiful. They were fancy. You know, they weren't in the hood. They weren't in the ghetto. It wasn't Roots. Like, they were in glamorous costumes and, you know, and then this woman shows up and she sings like me. She sings like I sing in church.
Yeah.
And so I was 11. And from that moment, I knew that my goal, because of my circumstance at the time, the traumatic part of it, I knew I had to get out.
Yeah.
And I knew that this was going to be my way out. My art was going to be my way out. So I just immersed myself in it in any way that I could find.
I know that you went on to Carnegie Mellon, which is and I mean, it's incredible. I mean, the alumni from that, I mean, you and Leslie Odom Jr. and Judith Light and I think Ethan Hawke went there. I mean, just Albert Brooks. I mean, just
Ethan Hawke went there for a year. He was a freshman when I was a sophomore. And then he got Dead Poets Society, and we never heard from him again.
And that was it. That was the end of his. But you got there, and the year, I think that your last year, you got cast in Miss Saigon is part of the ensemble. I mean, that's a huge deal. You're a senior in college, and you're on stage on Broadway.
Yes, the second semester of my senior year, I booked the original cast of Miss Saigon. And, you know, I got credit I graduated with my degree, because in the last year, it's like they sort of loosen the rules and you can go and do internships and stuff like that if something like that arises. And, I was very motivated because there was no B plan for me. There was no plan B.
Yeah.
It was the arts and it had to work, period. And so I was very motivated.
I'm curious because you had this sort of meteoric kind of rise at a college, right? You get this role on Broadway and, you must have felt extremely gratified and confident. Here you were, you'd worked really hard to become this charismatic figure on stage, and you get this role, and presumably you're thinking, okay, this is it. I mean, I've kind of made it. And within, I think you did Star Search, actually, a show that a lot of people don't remember, before America's Got Talent.
Before American Idol, honey, there was Star Search.
Star Search with Ed McMahon. And you won Star Search.
Yes, I did.
You actually won. And I think you were on at the same time as Britney Spears.
Yep.
Justin Timberlake.
Yes. The same year as all of those children. I was not a child, but they were children.
You were pretty young.
I was 21.
Just slightly post-child.
I could drink and vote.
Yeah, right. But you won. You won that competition. So you were you were on what seemed to be the fast track to writing your own ticket.
Yeah.
Certainly on Broadway. And you did. You get this role in 1994. You get a part in Grease.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it was part that
Teen Angel.
Teen Angel that Frankie
Avalon.
the film played by Frankie Avalon.
Yeah.
You get that role,
mm-hmm.
right? And tell me about that time in your life. Did you sort of have the sense that, okay, I've made it? I've made it.
No. It's bittersweet because what happens when your dreams come true and you realize they're not, the dream is not what you thought it would be. The vision I had for myself is what you're seeing me live now.
Yeah.
When I first got to New York City, being Black, being male, being queer, had even more limitations than what it has now. I can truly say that the world has changed. And I have lived long enough, and I'm grateful to have lived long enough to see the day where I can live as my authentic self fully and have the kind of success that I'm having. But at that time, in the early 90s, the pigeonhole was swift and it was suffocating. I was in the chorus of Miss Saigon, which was great.
Yeah.
My first gig. Everybody has to start somewhere. But there was no movement there. And then I shifted to Five Guys Named Mo, and I was a standby for 3 of the 6 men. There was no movement there. Then I was the teen angel in Grease.
Yeah.
And they turned me into a clown.
Yeah.
Where I talk about.
You can see performance of this. It was you on the Tonight Show, and it's on YouTube. You can people can find it, and to see what you're talking about. They kind of turned you into this prancing.
I call it the Millennium Coon Show in my book. Because it's a difficult thing to talk about because I'm grateful and I knew I had to get out of it.
You were being pigeonholed to be this kind of caricature.
Yeah. I call it, the magical fairy clown.
Yeah.
They had me in 14 inches of orange rubber hair, a white spacesuit, prancing around like a little Richard automaton on crack. And if I was a white boy, I would have just been in a suit and a pompadour. I don't understand, it's like, I just didn't understand that extreme. And I was really depressed. And I started questioning the dream. Because here I was living the dream, apparently.
Yeah.
And it was like, well, I got to change this dream because this is not it for me. I came into this world and into this space to make a difference. And to me, this is not making a difference. To me.
I read this story about an experience you had at that time because that role did, as you say, it depressed you. You felt really sad about and conflicted because on the one hand, here you are on a Broadway stage in Greece, performing on the Tonight Show with Jay Leno, and really also just hating that character that they turned you into.
Yeah.
And one night you went by yourself and saw Angels in
America. Yeah. When we talk about how representation matters, I had never seen a representation of myself anywhere.
Yeah.
I didn't even know I hadn't seen it. I didn't know that that's what I was mourning. The depression was from that. I wasn't seeing a representation of myself anywhere, so I couldn't necessarily dream beyond my circumstance, right? And so I saw this play. It was about the AIDS crisis.
Yeah.
It's probably, for me, it's like probably my favorite piece of writing ever. Like to me, because I came from a space, the religious space in particular, where, preachers and everybody stood on the pulpit and declared that AIDS was God's punishment.
Yeah.
And this play attacked that head on. It attacked the politics of it head on. And there was a Black character, and he was gay. And I looked at Jeffrey Wright. Jeffrey Wright played the role, originated the role on Broadway, won the Tony Award for it. And I sat in the audience by myself, and I saw that character, and I thought, that is what I came here to do.
Yeah.
That is the kind of work that I want to be a part of. And then it hit me because our theaters, the backs of our theaters butted up against each other. The back of the Angels in America Theater butted up against the Grease Theater.
Yeah.
And I was so depressed because I thought, how is anybody going to see me from Greece to Belize? Like, I have a long journey to convince the world now. I have a long journey. But I committed myself to taking it. And that was 94. And 16 years later, in 2010, I was cast in the first off-Broadway revival of Angels in America.
I want to ask you about that story in a minute because it's an important story. You did something that is both incredibly reckless and risky and incredibly courageous at the time, which is you decided that you did not want to play roles like Teen Angel anymore, that you wanted roles like Belize. You wanted a role that was more complex and nuanced, and you started to demand those roles. You started to say, I'm not going to play this character you want me to play on Broadway. I want these roles.
Yeah.
And it hurt you. It hurt you. It actually hurt your career.
I didn't work on Broadway for about a decade.
Tell me about making that decision, because looking at it back at it now, it's incredibly courageous, right? And in fact, you had to go through that to get to where you are now. We know that now, but you didn't have a crystal ball. You couldn't have said, I have to go through a period like Job and get tested. But you did. You were tested for more than a decade. You really didn't have much work.
I didn't, I had such a great amount of success early on.
Yeah.
That it never occurred to me that the transition would take so long and be so challenging. So I'm glad that I didn't know. I'm glad that I didn't have a crystal ball, because I don't know. You say courageous, and but I don't know if I would have had the courage to take that leap of faith had I known the journey that I would have had to take to get to the other side. I don't know. I mean, I would like to think that I would have done it anyway, but it was actually because I didn't know that I just leapt. My mother always said, God has bigger plans for you than you could ever dream of for yourself. And I am living proof of that. I never imagined that I could be this.
Yeah.
Everybody told me that my queerness would be my liability. And it was for decades. And I spent a very long time trying to be perceived as straight enough so that I could work.
Yeah. So
that I could eat. I did not set out initially to be my fullest, unadulterated, authentic self. There was nobody doing that. I didn't even know what that looked like. I didn't know that that was what I was leading to.
Yeah.
I didn't know. I really didn't.
One of the things that you decided to do was to literally go back to school. I mean, this is after you had pretty significant roles on Broadway. You'd had a record out. I mean, you'd been on other records. You become a student. You move to Los Angeles. You go to UCLA, and you start a screenwriting program there. And tell me what that forced you to do. Tell me what that sort of forced you to think about, and how did it sort of push your creativity?
Well, I was really frustrated. I had done a couple of movies, one being The Broken Hearts Club, which is sort of a gay classic right now after 20 years. And my record deal had imploded. The company was sold. I was Black and queer. They weren't really having that in the R&B world. It was very homophobic. Yeah. And I sort of walked away from it, But I went to Los Angeles thinking that I could maybe break into film and television. Right. And I got there and pretty quickly found that it was not time for me. Nobody was interested in me. I was there for almost 3 years, and I could count on one hand how many auditions I had. And I was really frustrated. And a friend of mine, Bruce Cohen, who is a TV and film producer, he won the Oscar for American Beauty, was a friend of mine. And he had lunch with me, and he said, Billy, you're very special. And I had heard this before, and it's like blah, 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 blah. You're too good for the job. You're too good. We don't know what to do with you. Like all that shit. And he was like, but I really feel like the truth of the matter is it's going to need to come from you.
Yeah.
Whatever it is, you're going to have to show us what to do, show us how to do it. Have you ever thought about writing? And I was like, yeah, and I had just done a film, and I had tried to write, and I bought a computer, and it was just interesting because I had sort of been dabbling. And he's the one that told me about the professional program in screenwriting at UCLA. And I went and applied and got in, and that was how I got there.
Yeah.
And it really created a space where I had agency.
Yeah.
I felt like I had agency in a way that I had not before.
How did you discover that sense of agency?
Because I was writing.
Yeah.
And I was writing what I wanted to write.
You were writing a voice that was your voice, that was a voice that
yes,
you could control that. You could sort of say, right.
Right. I was doing that. And I was also doing, there's an artistic, workbook. I don't know what you call it. It's called The Artist's Way.
The Artist's Way,
Cameron.
yeah.
And,
yeah. You bought that
and I
book?
was doing that. I was doing that at the same time. And I was really sort of excavating the truth of what I really wanted.
Yeah.
Because my dreams were based on an 11-year-old in trauma. And what I realized at 30 was your dreams can grow up. Your dreams have to mature. And so at 30, I realized, it's actually okay for me to not necessarily, it's like I want to be a star.
Yeah.
Well, what does that mean? Me wanting to be loved in some way. So if I was on the cover of magazines, if I was a superstar of some sort, then I would be loved.
Yeah.
Well, I had to let that go. I had to figure out how to love myself. And I had to figure out what it was that I wanted to say to the world. And so in my 30s, all of the stuff that I went through in my 30s to prepare me for who I am now and what I am now was really significant because it was hard.
Yeah.
Trials and tribulations, as we say in the church. You can't have a testimony unless you have a test. I was tested a lot. And I am now grateful for those tests.
Yeah.
In the moment, I went through it. It was hard. A lot of depression, a lot of heartache. I would not be the man I am today without having had to experience all those things.
When we come back after a quick break, Billy goes through what he describes as the worst year of his life and comes back stronger because of it. Stay with us. I'm Guy Raz, and you're listening to The Great Creators. Hey, welcome back to The Great Creators. I'm Guy Raz. Billy Porter had some early successes as a performer, starring in a couple of big Broadway shows. But now it's 2007, and his career is stalled, and his future looks bleak. You, in your late 30s, right, you described the year 2007 as the worst year of your life. You were broke. You had been diagnosed with type 2 diabetes.
In February.
Later that year, you were diagnosed HIV positive, which you...
In June and March, I signed bankruptcy papers.
Talking to you now, where you are today, is just incredible because you're obviously a huge star and your life is completely transformed. But I wonder in that year of 2007, you probably could not have imagined you would be you in 2022. How did you kind of walk me through how you kept yourself going and active and making stuff? Because you didn't stop. I mean, even in that sort of quote unquote fallow period, after 95, you were still making stuff, right? You were still trying to make records. You were still recording stuff. You might not have been making money, but you were still appearing in parts. You were taking this program and writing stuff. Like, how did you just motivate yourself to even do that?
It's the only thing I had. My art is the only thing that I've ever had that's been consistent. Even when it has been heartbreaking it's been consistent, right? There's a consistent healing energy to me practicing my art. And my mentor, George C. Wolfe, said to me, you can't wait for anybody to give you permission to practice your art.
And George Wolfe ran the public theater at the time.
Yes. Mm-hmm. You can't wait for anybody to give you permission to practice your art. You have to be practicing it always, even when no one's listening. And most of the time, no one will be listening. And that sustained me.
Yeah.
Because I found that whenever I was engaged in something artistic, whether I was making money or not, I could find a balance and I could find a hope inside of that work.
We're coming up to 2010, which was a hugely pivotal year in your life and transformational, which is, I want to ask you about in a moment. And you were cast in Angels in America, but in that period of time before, right, almost 15-year period of just a lot of struggle and financial struggle and professional struggle. But you said something just now about how that's all you had. The art was all you had, that you had to do that because it's all you had. But I have to think that while you were doing things that may sometimes have seemed like they were leading to nowhere, right? They weren't bringing you big paychecks or bigger roles. You were honing something. You were finding a voice.
Yeah.
You were getting better at something.
Yes. And I knew that.
Wow.
I was completely aware of that as it was happening. I'm going through this for the greater good of something else. I'm not just sitting on my ass, complaining, feeling sorry for myself. I'm practicing my art and therefore sharpening, honing, and getting better at everything.
Yeah.
It's like my Aunt Dorothy said, stay ready so you don't have to get ready. I was staying ready.
Stay ready so you don't have to get ready.
I was ready. Even
something like writing, right? Like you were born a singer. You were a gifted singer. You were touched by the hand of God, like that. But you still had to. I mean, you had this raw, sort of raw talent that you had to kind of hone. But then writing was something that you had to find that gift, and that's really hard. It's really hard to become a good writer. Even good writers have a hard time writing. I mean, tell me about that process of just taking that screenwriting class and writing things and trying. Because I mean, you put together I think it was your first show that you wrote in 2005, right? This was the show.
Yes, my one-person show, Ghetto Superstar.
And you wrote that show. So to get to a point where you could write something that you could perform at the public theater, how did you kind of struggle through that challenging period of just the grind of trying to learn how to write something that you could put out into the world?
I was asking the universe for something more. I am more than my voice. I am more than this. And I had gotten nervous. I was living in Los Angeles for 2 years and 9 months, and I got nervous.
Nervous about?
Just, I wasn't making any money.
Yeah.
And instead of continuing down the road of poverty, I decided, I'm going to jump back in. And they were doing a revival of Little Shop of Horrors. And I booked it. And I was going to make bags of money. And I was going to move back to New York and be the voice of the plant. And we were out of town in Florida. And it wasn't really going so well. And, directorially, they didn't like the direction. And so the director got fired. A new director came in. And I got fired. And I knew, okay, universe, I see you. Like if you want something for real, sometimes you have to close one door and do the work so that the other doors can open. And I called George distraught. And he said, you don't need to be doing that anyway. You don't need to be standing in the back, singing in a microphone for no plant. Just come down here and I'll give you an office and you'll write. And so I had a residency at the Public Theater for like 3-4 years. I worked with George on the remounting of Top Dog Underdog in London. You know, he was putting up Carolina Change, Tony Kushner and Janine Tesori's musical. And then I wrote my one-person show. And it was interesting because he would not allow me to assist him. He just had me in the room. Said, just come into the room and observe. And it was like, what better training can you get than being in a room with George Wolfe and Susan Laurie Parks? Or being in a room with George Wolfe and Tony Kushner and Janine Tesori.
Just watching this.
As watching. I mean, can you imagine?
No.
Watching from the ground up. Carolina Change, Tony Kushner, watching him daily rewrite scenes, watching Janine Tesori rewrite music on the spot. Like, it was like, I've never seen anything, you know, like, it's like you can't pay for that kind of, there's no training program that can give you that. And then I was writing my own show at the same time. And George was mentoring me on that.
Yeah.
So, you know, I wasn't making no money. I did not have a paycheck at all.
Yeah.
I was living on $425 a week from unemployment. And I don't even remember how I did that. I was subletting. I was, you know, I don't know. But those moments are the ones that I look back at and go, I'm ready.
Yeah.
I'm ready for all of this that's in front of me right now. You know, people are like, how do you know how to do so many things? You know, and it's like, right. Because I've put in the work. Yeah. I really have put in the work.
And that's it. I mean, you're watching these sort of masters of their craft, and you're kind of absorbing it while working on your own thing. And it's helping you kind of think about how you write what you're writing.
Mm-hmm. And what I want to write.
Yeah.
You know, what I want to write. What I want, the energy I want to put out into the world. What kind of artist do I want to be?
Yeah. Did you find writing your first script, which was your story, or partially your story, did you find that to be one of the hardest things up until that point you had done in your life?
Writing, period.
Yeah.
is the hardest thing I've ever done in my life, up until directing a movie.
What do you mean by that, though? I mean, you've done stage and screenwriting. You even wrote a memoir called Unprotected. I'm curious about your perspective. What do you find hard about writing?
The self-judgment.
Yeah.
You know, I revere writers so much. And the hardest thing for me is to just do it and not compare myself to my favorites. I have to get all of my favorites out of my head.
Yeah.
You know, when I was writing my memoir, it was like I was paralyzed for a year and some change because it didn't sound like James Baldwin. It didn't feel like Toni Morrison. You know, it didn't feel like Tony Kushner. Like, I was like, if it's not going to be that brilliant, then why do it? And that's not fair. And that's not how one should be creative. That's not how you do it.
But self-judgment is a really common thing for high-performing people. I hear it again and again. And I think it's not something you can ever fully eradicate, but I wonder how you have gotten past that. Like, how do you get past that point where you're like, okay, Billy, just stop.
Do it. Yeah. I think it's different with every project. You know, with my memoir, it was, you know, because the memoir was new. I have less and less of it writing music and less of it writing musicals and plays and screenplays. I have less and less of it now with that. But the book was literary, right? And I'm like, ooh, I'm trying to be literary now.
Yeah.
And, for me, it was practical. It was just a combination of the book was a year overdue and almost a year overdue, and we got locked down in COVID. And it was like, I have COVID to fix this. I don't know how long COVID is going to last, but by the time COVID is over, this book needs to be done.
Yeah.
Period. And I just started writing and not thinking about it. Just do it. Because writing is rewriting.
Yeah.
And that's what I have to keep reminding myself of. That's the first thing they say in screenwriting class and in all writing classes. Writing is rewriting. Writing is rewriting. It doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't need to be perfect. It will never be perfect. Rewrite it, but get it out so that you have something to rewrite.
So 2010, you get an opportunity to audition for that part, Belize, in the 20th anniversary production of Angels in America. And you are rehearsing in front of Tony Kushner. And I think the director was Michael
Greif.
Michael Greif. And you go and you rehearse. Now, you had not been on Broadway at this point, I think, for 15 years. 10 years.
10.
Right.
10.
It's been 10 years. And you are rehearsing in front of, like, one of your absolute heroes and idols. And first of all, how did you maybe you weren't, but how did you kind of overcome that anxiety of that, just that even?
I didn't have any anxiety.
You didn't have any anxiety?
No. The casting directors wouldn't see me, true to form. It was like, oh, he can't really do that. He's a singer. And because Tony Kushner had known me from working with George on, he knew my work. He knew that I was talented.
Yeah.
And he was willing to give me an audition, but like they had seen everybody.
Yeah.
And they had been auditioning for months. And it was interesting. This is an interesting story because we both were going to Equinox Gym and we're both artists. So we don't have a regular schedule where we go to the gym.
Right.
So I was going at different times a day. And for almost like 2, maybe 3 weeks in a row, every time I was at the gym at a different point, on a different day, Tony Kushner was there. Hey, Tony, how you doing? How you doing? Finally, he says to me in the locker room, we're like in our underwear. He's like, have you gotten your audition for Angels yet? And I said, no. And he was like, why? And I was like, I don't know. And my agent had been pressing and pressing and pressing.
Yeah.
And he said, okay, let me work on that. And the next day I get a call from my agent, who is now my manager, Bill Butler, who I've been with for 31 years, by the way.
Wow.
And he said, oh, they want to see you tomorrow. And he was angry.
He was angry.
He was angry because it's a lot of work. They wanted me to do 3 scenes from Angels in America, and they were like, they want you to do 3 scenes. And I tried to get you, and he was panicked. He was anxious. And I stopped him and I said, Bill, there is one role in the history of the theater that looks like me. There's one in the history of the theater that looks like me. It's a 20-year-old play. If I don't already know the material, that's my fault. I know every fucking word. What scenes do they need? And he gave me the scenes, and I went in the next day. And, and it was just a courtesy. I knew it was a courtesy audition. Yep. And I think one of the things that we have to know in this world is not only as artists and anything, know what you do and know what you don't do, and also know how you're being perceived. Not because it matters, but know how you're being perceived so you can go right to the root of whatever that perception is if you want to change it. And so I knew they didn't know. I knew they didn't know. I knew Tony didn't know.
Yeah.
I knew he liked me and thinks I'm talented, but I knew he didn't know. Why would he know? I had never had the opportunity to do anything. So why would they know? So take the ego out of it, right? Take the ego out of it, go to this audition and show them. I love auditions.
Yeah.
Because it's the only space where I get to show and prove
what you can do.
What folks don't know.
Yeah.
You know, so I went in, I said the first sentence, and I saw the whole room lean in. And I did those 3 scenes, and an hour later, I was in there for an hour. There were people outside waiting. I was in there for an hour.
Wow.
Tony worked with me. Michael worked with me. They were gagged. They were like, and by the end of it, Tony Kushner got up with tears streaming down his face.
Wow.
Gave me a bear hug and said, "You're the voice that I had in my head when I wrote this play." I said, "I know. That's what I've been trying to tell y'all."
Wow.
Yes, I know. And thank you. You know, because when I went to see it, no shade to Jeffrey Wright, he was brilliant.
Yeah.
He's a little bit older than me, so he was the right age for it. But when I saw that, I thought, there are very few things that I do best that nobody else can do better than me. That is one of those things.
It's amazing to me because 16 years earlier, you saw that role, you saw that play, and you, in your head, you knew that that character was you. And you have literally overnight, you've got to prepare for this audition, which was the next day. And now I go back to your Aunt Dorothy, right? If you stay ready, you don't have to get ready. Right. And
I knew they were having auditions.
Yeah.
I knew they were having auditions. They were having auditions for months. Of course I was working on the whole play.
Wow. Even though nobody called you, you weren't getting a call. You knew that you were ready for it.
When the call comes, be ready, right? You have to be ready. You can't wait for people to tell you what to do.
And also, you can't wait for people to give you permission to do that role.
Mission.
Right?
Right. Look at the market and see what's out there and go, I want that, and I want that.
So really, 2010, transformational year. You do that show, and then eventually, just 3 years later, you originate the role of Lola on Broadway in Kinky Boots. That wins you, I think, a Tony for Best Actor. I think the recording won a Grammy. You got a Grammy too, right? And there was a Drama Desk Award. You got the Drama Desk Award. I mean, like you got the Triple Crown on that role.
Yes.
I mean, it's kind of, I don't know. I mean, are there moments where, like a moment like that, or even the moment where Tony Kushner and Michael Greif are like, "Yep, this is your role. You're going to be on Broadway you're going to be Belize," and you
off Broadway,
but still you're playing that role.
I'm back in New York.
Do you get emotional? Do you just sort of stop and think, I was struggling for a decade. I didn't know if I would have a career.
It's very emotional. I always had huge dreams, but they were always springboarded off of things I had already seen. I never dreamed the impossible. What I am and what I stand before you as today was an impossibility when I was in my youth. It was impossible. You know, I didn't even know how to dream this big. And now there's a whole new generation that can look at me and understand how to dream the impossible.
Yeah.
Look at Lil Nas X. I'm a part of the generation that kicked that door down.
Yeah.
So that boy could be a queer black pop star.
Superstar. Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, it's like they kicked my black faggot ass out of the music industry in 97. They kicked me out.
Yeah.
Because of my queerness. You know, and now I'm back. Now I'm coming back. Now I have my own pop album. Now I have signed to Republic Records, #1 label in the business. Yeah. Like, I'm gagged. I sometimes I look at it, I mean, talk about emotional. it's like, yeah, it makes me very emotional. And I'm so grateful to have lived long enough to experience this, because people who are a part of a transition, very often people who are trailblazers, don't often get to reap the benefits of the trails that they've blazed.
Yeah.
And it's not lost on me that I'm getting to do both. And that's magical.
Yeah. When we come back in just a moment, Billy Porter continues to be a trailblazer, playing Pray Tell in the FX series Pose, and in real life as a gender-bending fashion icon. Stay with us. I'm 𝐦𝐤𝐳, and you're listening to The Great Creators. Hey, welcome back to The Great Creators. I'm 𝐦𝐤𝐳. So, on the red carpet at any award show or gala event, Billy Porter slays every time. He's shown up wearing an entirely silver suit complete with matching boots or snakeskin pants, capes, fringe, huge wide-brimmed hats. His entrance at the Met Gala as an Egyptian sun god is legendary. And if you don't know it, we'll link it in our show notes. And there was a time he showed up to the Oscars in a half tuxedo, half ball gown.
You know, I've always been a fashion person. And because of church. And my favorite time of year was Easter and Christmas, because I got a new suit every Easter and every Christmas.
Yeah.
And I extended that tradition through my 30s. When I got into Kinky Boots, I knew that I wanted to use fashion as a way to express myself, because I'm an observer, and I saw all the ladies. And I'm like, the ladies get to use their fashion as another revenue stream, to be quite frank. And I was like, the men don't really get to do that because we're always in a penguin suit. And what's interesting is that when I was doing Kinky Boots, I knew, okay, I want to go geek chic, because I'm playing a drag queen, so let me go, geek chic with the pocket squares and bow ties, and I had colors, and if you go and look back at that time, it was like, and so I thought, when I do press for Kinky Boots, this is what'll happen. This is where I'll go. It was very focused. I was planned. And we were out of town in Chicago, and as you know, I hadn't been on Broadway in like 10 years, and the internet had blown up. And so we did our first preview. I came out afterwards. It was the beginning of winter, and I was wrapped up like a vagabond, because you rehearse all day, and then you do the show, and you go home, and then you come back early, and you rehearse all day, and you fix stuff, you do the show, and so I wasn't prepared for the change. So I took pictures with people, and then I woke up the next morning, and they were all over the internet. Me looking like a vagabond. And I was like, oh my God, I'm going to have to dress up every day. And that's what I did for 3 years. And I would come out of the stage door, and people made fun of me. People were like, why are you dressed up all the time? Like, it's like, no, people are taking pictures of me. I got an international Gap ad because I dressed up every day. And Cyndi Lauper's manager went in to pitch Cyndi Lauper for the Gap ad, and they said, well, we're doing doubles. And she said, well, what about Billy Porter? He just won the Tony too. And they were like, oh, right, what does he look like again? And they typed my name into the computer, and all of these photos came up of me snatched. And I got an international Gap ad because of that. So I knew that while I was spending way too much money on clothes because nobody was dressing me, I knew that I'm the business. Yeah. I personally am the business. So I have to invest in the company. My business manager was like, you're spending too much money on clothes. I'm like, I'm doing something. I'm trying to do something.
Yeah.
So fast forward to Pose, and now I'm on these huge red carpets, and I was nominated for a Golden Globe, and the first thing I did was that cape with the pink inside.
The
and
pink cape,
and
yeah.
I did all the parties. The lining was pink. And I did all the parties that weekend and I turned it out. And I woke up and I didn't win the Golden Globe, but I certainly did wake up on that Sunday to the New York Times article that said, at Golden Globes parties, Billy Porter is the winner. That was before the ceremony. And that was my first time out.
Amazing.
You know, and it was like,
Amazing.
I knew that there was a power in it. I just didn't know that it was going to be that powerful. And then people were saying to me, you're going to be at the Oscars. You're going to go to the Oscars. You're going to be at the Oscars. And I was like, I'm on television. Why would I be at the Oscars? Like, it didn't make any sense to me. And I'm like, yeah, whatever. 10 days before, 12 days before the Oscars, I get a call to co-host the ABC red carpet. I need my Oscar moment. And that's all I could think about. I was like, it's the Super Bowl for show business. What am I going to do?
And it's so cool because, as I say, there's like, you can find like 40, 50 photos of you in these incredible outfits. And it's also a creative outlet.
Yeah.
I mean, it's also a way for you to think about, just what you want to say.
It's
and
activism.
What you want to be for that moment.
I stand at the intersection of this movement of the degendering of fashion. Doesn't matter. Yeah. Let's degender it. It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
It really doesn't matter. And I've been really fortunate to have this other explosion that has just, cracked other spaces open for me as well.
Yeah. You mentioned this character, Belize, that you saw in 1994, and you saw yourself for the first time on stage, and then you became him, and you brought him to life. And this is a character that is so close to who you are.
Mm-hmm.
And then you're cast as Pray Tell in Pose on FX. And this character it's like elements
closer
of Belize.
Than anybody knew.
Closer to you than anything that you've played. This, for people who don't know the show, it sort of takes place in the 80s and 90s, and it kind of follows, it's sort of
ballroom culture. Black and brown, LGBTQ plus.
You're a fashion designer in the show, but cantankerous, but also wise and sort of the voice of reason, but also HIV positive.
And the MC of the balls, darling.
And the MC, yeah.
Yes.
When you first saw this character, what was your reaction to reading the script?
Well, first of all, there was no script. I was called in to audition for the dance teacher, which Charlene Woodard ended up playing. And it was Ryan Murphy. Ryan Murphy had been on my vision board for about 15 years.
Yeah.
Because I understood that he was unafraid of, I could watch his work and see that he was unafraid of big performances. He was unafraid of extraness, as the kids call it. He wanted that. He sort of, and I knew that he would understand me and get me. And so when I got the call, it was for the wrong role. And I knew that. And I went into the casting director. And at this point, I had won the Tony and I had won the Grammy. And so I could speak from a place of authority that earlier in my career was sort of deemed as arrogance and stepping over a line.
Yeah.
But I went and I auditioned as the dance teacher, and then I said to the casting director, I think this is the wrong part for me. If you're going to do a show about the ballroom, which is about the AIDS crisis, I actually lived it. It was, the series is based on Paris is Burning. I was like, that, I lived that. Don't you need one of the mothers of the houses of or something like that over on that other side?
Yeah.
It would be a waste of time to have me in the show and not have me in that world. So that's when she told me that Ryan was going to have all transgender women. Yeah. And I was like, well, that's an amazing idea. And I said, well, just ask him and see. And a couple weeks later, she called and said, Ryan thinks you're right. He wants you to come in for all the people involved. And if you can do an imitation of the MC, he will create a role for you.
And by the way, you were ready for that because you had wanted to be the MC in Cabaret. Just coming back to
Yes.
You're ready for this role. All right, keep going.
But also, I had lived it.
Yeah.
And so, I went in, and Ryan is so smart because, I never did well in auditions for film and television on tape. I'm an in the room kind of guy. Because what happens is, I go on tape and I make big swings. I take big choices. I make big choices.
Yeah.
Really focused choices. And if it's not the choice that they want, then the assumption is that's all you can be, and I'm dismissed.
Yeah.
And so when I'm in the room, like you are in the theater, they can ask you for adjustments.
Sure.
And then you can show on the spot how quickly you can adjust something. And that's what has always gotten me the job. So up until that point, I had only booked film and TV jobs where I was in the room.
Yeah.
I had never booked a job from a tape. This is what I'm saying. Ryan Murphy was so smart that he brought the entire team, the production team, the creator, the writers, everybody.
Wow.
He brought them and put them in a room like it was the final audition of a Broadway show, which is where I soar.
Right.
And brought me, MJ, and Dominique in a room so that they could feel our energy, and he sat me there. The role wasn't even written. I had 17 pages of declarations. The category is, and I just did that.
Wow.
I just read the declarations one after another. They were falling over in their seats.
Yeah.
And then he said, okay, sit down. And he asked me about Trump. And about 25 minutes later, half hour later, him asking me questions and me going completely off.
Yeah.
He said, we really want you to be a part of this. And they created Pray Tell.
They created this character out of that.
It did not exist.
And then you brought that character to life. And they've captured you, right? They've captured all those things. You had fame early on, and then you had a long period of challenges, and then you exploded after the age of 40 in your creativity and your work, and you're like just starting. You win a Tony and a Grammy, and then you win the Emmy. You're nominated for a Golden Globe. You win the Emmy for this role. I think you were the first openly gay black male lead to win a primetime Emmy.
I am.
I wonder, Billy, in those moments, and maybe not, I don't know, but I'm just like, do you think about, I don't know, your mom or where you grew up or all those years where you struggled to find work? And do you are there moments where you're able to reflect on that?
Yes. Not enough. I am working on my consistent joy, feeling it. I've been in trauma therapy all of COVID, and a trauma response is not being able to feel joy. And so I'm working on that.
Can you tell me how do you let yourself experience joy when your body and your mind is telling you not to?
I meditate. I write. I try to be still.
Yeah.
And allow the energy to flow through me. I'm moving toward Buddhism these days, doing a lot of mindfulness work. When I'm meditating, I can feel it. When I'm listening to my, gurus, I can feel it. And I'm just trying to move that into a more consistent I want to be able to be more consistent with my joy.
Yeah. Billie, while you've talked about, COVID and just the challenge of that time for everyone, but for you really had to be particularly careful because you are living with HIV. You're very healthy and obviously very physically fit, but still have to be careful because, we didn't know who was vulnerable. We didn't know if you had diabetes or if you had, some other chronic condition.
I'm diabetic and HIV positive, so I got out of Dodge.
Right. And you also in 2021, kind of went public with your condition. At that point, you'd been living a healthy, strong, vital life. Was there a reason why you felt it was time to kind of talk about it? Or because you could have just not said anything forever, or you could have, I don't know.
I was playing Pray Tell, and he was dying of AIDS. And I was writing my book. And I just happened to be talking to my publicist about it. And we were talking about the year ahead. And I was like, so in October, I'm going to come out HIV positive in the book. Because it's like, you have to get ahead of the narrative in this business as an artist. You have to get ahead of the narrative. And I was like, so I'm going to say it so nobody else says it. But what was interesting was that my publicist was like, he didn't know. And he was like, okay, look, you're playing Pray Tell and he dies of AIDS on television in April. By June, you will be dead of AIDS on television. If you don't come out being HIV positive before that yourself, this cancel culture world is going to use that against you. The reason why you're so popular is because you're truthful and you're honest. And it's not fair, but they're going to use it to say that you haven't been honest if you wait till October. So you have to do it right now. And Simon Halls and Ryan Murphy crafted the moment, crafted the space with the Hollywood Reporter, and made it a thing. And, I'm really grateful because I'm in control of it. That's a big part of this world, this business. It's like, it's always about the gotcha. There ain't no gotcha with me. I've laid everything that I am bare in front of the whole world. Yeah. So y'all can't call me on nothing. You can't say I've lied about anything. Y'all have all the information. Do with it what you will. You don't like it, leave. It's freeing. I'm free.
And it's also like knowing what anyone who sort of, is old enough to remember the 80s. Yeah. And in that time, it is a miracle. I mean, that being HIV positive has zero effect on your lifespan. Right. Like you can live until your late 90s. It's normal life. It's a managed chronic condition.
Yes. It's I am what HIV positive looks like now. So take the stigma away and shut the fuck up. Yes, I am. It's just, and I have to say the diabetes and the HIV as a Black man coming from a community that does not trust doctors and does not trust the medical profession has forced me to take care of myself. I'm healthier than I've ever been as a result of those two diagnoses. So, you got to look at the gift of it.
We've talked about all of these, just this incredible variety of things you've done: theater, television, you've been in films, you've recorded albums, different kinds of albums, R&B to, revivals of Broadway shows. You've written plays, and then you fashion, the whole fashion stuff, right? And then you had your directorial debut in 2022, Anything's Possible.
Yes.
We'll talk about this film, but like all of these things I've just mentioned, I mean, it sounds like you pursue just things that just fire your brain.
Yes.
Like just make your brain just fire on all, like the synapses are connecting.
Yes.
And like you almost like you have to do those things.
Yes.
Because you just have this appetite to learn and to grow.
Yes. And I have a story to tell, and I have a world to change. You know, I'm a witness. I'm a witness to what's going on in the world and how it's we, the people, that make the difference and make the change. And there's no room for fear. That, you know, Toni Morrison says it, you know, this is precisely the time when artists go to work. There's no room for fear. There's no need for silence. We speak, we write, we do language. This is how civilizations heal. I'm trying to be a part of the healing of this world, you know, and that is what I do through my art. I have been in a space of healing because of my art for my entire life. There are no limits to your dreams. There are no limits. It's, you know, it's like there is no glass ceiling. There are no limits. I'm doing everything. Whatever comes before me, I'm doing it. Yes, I want to star in it. I want to direct it. You know, I want to write it. I want all of it. And that's okay. You know, I'm trying to be a mogul. I'm trying to run the world. I joke and say I'm trying to be the head bitch in charge. You know, I've seen other people do it. So why can't I? Oprah did it. So why can't I? I want to make a difference that's beyond just me. You know what I mean? It's beyond just my own ego and my own, like, how can I use the gifts that I have to be of service? And this is how I do it.
That's Billy Porter. His memoir, Unprotected, is now out in paperback. We'll link to some of Billy's Broadway performances and to an article with photos of more than 40 amazing Billy Porter outfits, including that famous tuxedo gown. You can find them in the show notes at thegreatcreators.com/Porter. We publish show notes for all of our episodes at thegreatcreators.com. Hey, it's Guy, and I hope you enjoyed this conversation. For more like it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. And for the audio version, just open up your favorite podcast app, search for The Great Creators, and tap follow.